Have you ever witnessed cruelty so raw that it chokes you inside? When a disabled girl quietly sat in her wheelchair at the Canyon Grill diner and became the punching bag for a pack of loudmouth bullies, not a single person dared speak up to defend her. But exactly 1 hour later, the ground started shaking. The roar of 100 Harleys rolled in like a steel storm sweeping through town. And when the Hells Angels walked through that door, everyone in the diner got a lesson in respect they'd never forget for the rest of their lives. Before we start the story, let us know where you're watching from. Your comments always give us more motivation. Harper Lewis, a 16-year-old girl living in Flagstaff, Arizona, had grown used to seeing the world from the height of a small old wheelchair in a way no one would ever choose. At age 4, a truck accident took her parents and left her legs paralyzed forever, but it never took the resilience in her eyes. Still, every time she went out, Harper felt like a silent shadow scrutinized by looks of pity, curiosity, or deliberate avoidance. She hated it. The awkward silence, the half-assed questions, and the way people treated her as if her very existence was a reminder no one wanted to see. That morning, the Arizona sun was strong enough to scorch the tin roofs of the shops along Route 66, but Harper still wheeled herself out of the house, determined to do something she rarely dared: eat breakfast alone. She wanted the feeling of a normal day, a morning without pity, without judging stares, just her and a corner table in a little diner. When Harper pushed open the door of the Canyon Grill diner, the bell gave a light tinkle that blended with the smell of frying bacon and hot coffee filling the air. She forced a thin smile like a shield, trying to hide the anxiety churning in her chest. Harper picked a table by the window where the Arizona sunlight streamed through the old glass, spreading a warm glow across the wooden tabletop that lightened her heart just a little. She set down her backpack, straightened her shirt, and opened the menu, hoping this morning could pass peacefully like it did for ordinary people. But normal was something Harper always had to fight for. Just as she turned the first page, the doorbell rang again, sharp and fast, followed by a familiar wave of noise. 5 young men strode in, their boots hitting the tile floor, heavy and confident in a way that made everyone look. Harper recognized them without even lifting her head: the Drayton crew, Flagstaff's notorious troublemakers. They weren't criminals, but they were big enough, reckless enough, and protected enough that anyone in town felt uneasy around them. Leading the pack was Jace Drayton, spiked hair, half-smirk, and eyes that said, "I get whatever I want." As the son of the richest construction contractor in the area, Jace had never truly faced consequences. Harper lowered her head further, hoping their gaze would just slide past her. But that hope vanished the instant Jace turned toward her table. The feeling was unmistakable, just like hundreds of times before, a mix of scrutiny, amusement, and surprise that turned into the stare of someone who'd found fresh entertainment. One of the guys leaned in and whispered to Jace, but Harper heard every word because they didn't bother lowering their voices. "Look, there's a wheelchair." Laughter burst out right after, quiet but sharp, slicing through the fragile peace Harper had tried to build for her morning. She gripped the edge of the menu tighter, trying to ignore them, but the group didn't stop. One started mimicking the sound of wheelchair wheels. Creak, squeak, creak, squeak, dragging it out, twisting it into mockery. Another added sound effects, making the whole group howl. Harper wanted to disappear right then, to melt into the wall behind her, to be anyone but herself. She kept her eyes down, but the laughter stabbed straight into her heart like needles. Then the biggest guy in the group jumped up, staggered over, pretending to limp, and grabbed the back of a chair, dragging out his words in mockery. "Oops, watch out, I might fall just like you." The group roared even louder. Harper clenched the arms of her wheelchair until her knuckles went white. She turned her face to the window, staring at the swaying pines in the distance, searching for any small anchor. But peace wasn't easy to find. Jace leaned back in his seat, elbows on the table, staring straight at her and saying loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "Hey, need us to push you out? With that tiny little wheelchair, you'll probably still be trying to reach the door by afternoon." Cruel, piercing laughter exploded. And the worst part wasn't that they were laughing. It was that the entire diner stayed silent. Harper glanced around. The old couple in the corner instantly buried their faces in their newspaper. A man dipping toast into his eggs suddenly became fascinated with his empty plate. Marcy, the young waitress, spun around fast and started rearranging sugar packets that were already perfectly lined up. The owner stood behind the register, brow furrowed like he was calculating a bill, but his eyes never moved once. They all knew, everyone knew, but no one did anything. That silence was like a thick fog wrapping around Harper, making her feel like she was sitting alone in the most crowded room in the world. The air grew suffocating, heavy, every breath became difficult. In that moment she realized a truth adults rarely admit: sometimes cruelty doesn't come from the loud bullies, it comes from the bystanders who choose silence. Harper felt an invisible hand squeezing her chest, as if she'd been turned into public entertainment on a stage where the audience didn't just watch, they abandoned her. Marcy stood behind the counter, gripping the dish towel so hard the creases dug into her fingers. She saw everything but her feet felt glued to the floor. It wasn't because she didn't care, it was fear rooted too deep. Jace Drayton and his crew had done plenty of awful things in Flagstaff, yet everything always got smoothed over by a father with money and connections that reached City Hall. Marcy was a single mom, paid by the hour, barely scraping rent together each month. One wrong word, and she could lose her job. Losing her job meant losing everything. So she bit her lip until it bled, turned away pretending not to see, but her heart was tearing itself apart. Harper tried to slide her gaze past the chaos surrounding her, but every corner of the diner only made her feel more crushed. In the far corner, an elderly couple sat side by side. The man's hands trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. The woman rested hers on the table as if holding herself steady. Both saw what was happening. Harper caught their eyes flickering for a few seconds, but then they looked down at their black coffee like it had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. A small action, yet to Harper it felt like a silent knife. They didn't miss it, they chose not to see. And that choice hurt worse than the Drayton crew's laughter. A few tables away, a man in a blue shirt eating alone dropped his gaze the instant Harper accidentally looked his way. He spun his egg plate as if checking whether the yolk was cooked right, pretending nothing was happening. A younger woman holding a baby quickly stood up, scooped her child, and hurried out of the diner. Harper didn't know if she left because she was scared of the thugs or scared of the responsibility if she spoke up, but either way the image hit Harper's already fragile faith like a kick. Inside the Canyon Grill, not a single person said a word. All the usual morning sounds, the sizzle of the griddle, forks clinking on plates, casual chatter, vanished, replaced by a thick, touchable silence. Harper felt like the diner was no longer a place to eat, but a twisted stage where she was the main character being mocked. From his seat, Jace Drayton grinned triumphantly, drawing circles in the air like he owned the room. "Hey, why's everyone so quiet?" he said, leaning back and throwing his feet onto the next chair. "Come on, we're just livening up the morning." One of his buddies slammed the table laughing. The sound echoed like it was trying to drown Harper. Another narrowed his eyes. "I think that chair needs oil, man. It's squeaking bad." The group erupted again. Harper felt the humiliation seep into every breath. But what made her shake wasn't just the thugs, it was the obvious way everyone avoided her. No one was on her side. No one said, "That's enough." No one said, "Leave the kid alone." No one. Harper used to think Flagstaff was a peaceful place, that people in a small town looked out for each other. But right then she realized some things are scarier than cruelty: indifference. The owner, Mr. Randall, was only a few steps from the counter if he wanted to intervene, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed glued to a receipt, hand resting on the cash drawer, but Harper knew he wasn't checking anything. He was just hiding in his own silence. Barry Drayton, Jace's dad, had fixed Randall's awning for free last year after a hailstorm. Randall never said it out loud, but the whole town knew he owed a debt. And today's silence was the price. Harper felt her heart sink like a stone dropped into still water. Tears welled up, but she swallowed hard, clenched her fists to stay calm. But the effort only exhausted her more. The thugs kept escalating, as if their fun came from pushing Harper's limits inch by inch. One shouted, "Hey, why aren't you saying anything? Did your voice get broken too?" Jace pretended to be serious, nodding. "Yeah, maybe." Then they laughed again, like they'd discovered the funniest thing all day. Harper couldn't count how many times she'd been bullied, stared at with pity or contempt, or pretended not to hear. But she had never felt this alone. It wasn't just humiliation. It was being abandoned by the entire town. She could feel the air in the diner shift. Not tension, but surrender. Harper understood they were afraid of Jace, afraid of his family. But that didn't ease her pain. On the contrary, it made her feel worthless in their eyes, like the adults saw her as just a passing shadow, not worth risking anything to protect. Drip by drip, the taunts, the glances, the laughter, the turning away, Humiliation soaked into Harper, into her skin, her memory, her heart. And when Jace crossed his arms, flashed his smug grin, Harper knew if this went on a little longer, she would break. But deep inside the canyon grill, among adults dodging responsibility, amid cruel laughter and merciless silence, Harper had no idea that the first sound of change was already approaching from afar. A sound no one in the diner was ready to face: the growing roar of Harley-Davidson engines, one beat at a time, shattering the silence the thugs in this town had created. Harper heard Jace's shoes scraping the floor, then the click of a phone camera, like an invisible slap. He raised the phone, tilted his head, his half-smirk dripping with sick pleasure. "Hey guys, check this out," Jace announced loudly so the whole diner could hear. "She's shaking so hard the wheels are about to fall off." A burst of laughter exploded like firecrackers, sharp and cutting through the already suffocating air. Harper tried to keep her hands steady, but the tighter she gripped, the more they shook. Her chest tightened. Every breath felt like someone was yanking it out of her lungs. Her head dropped so low it nearly touched her chest, eyes fixed on the tabletop as if pure focus could make the vicious sounds disappear. But the laughter wormed into every crack. There was no blocking it. Another guy pulled out his phone, shoved it close to Harper's face, and narrated in a slimy voice. "Shaking that bad, sweetie? Scared of us that much?" Then he yanked the phone back, pretending to scream, "Oh no, don't cry, you'll ruin your mascara." The group howled again, loud and chaotic like hyenas circling a dying animal. Harper bit her lower lip hard to hold back tears, but it didn't work. The humiliation crashed over her like a wave, sweeping away everything she'd tried to hold together. One tear fell onto the table, soft, small but enough for them to see. "Oh," Jace drawled. "She's really crying. Man, I didn't even say anything heavy yet." Harper heard him recording, heard the click as the clip saved, heard them comment on her tear-streaked face like it was a comedy video. Another leaned in close, clicking his tongue. "Let me see how bad she's shaking." Then he reached out like he was going to touch her arm, making Harper flinch back on reflex, but the wheelchair could only go so far. That tiny movement sent them into hysterics, as if her fear was cheap entertainment. Harper couldn't see clearly anymore. Her eyes blurred with tears, but she didn't dare wipe them. She didn't want to give them more ammunition, but the tears kept falling, hot and burning, splashing onto the table, spreading into little streaks like marks of surrender. Each drop was a piece of her dignity, cracking. Then the Drayton crew's laughter rang out again, louder, meaner, echoing through the diner like a verdict. The whole canyon grill stayed silent. No one said enough. No one stood up. No one stood up. No one banged the table in protest. They kept stirring their coffee, staring at their plates, pretending Harper didn't exist. And it was that silence, not the Drayton crew's laughter, that finally broke Harper inside. She wasn't just humiliated, she was abandoned. She realized the deepest pain didn't come from the thugs. It came from the people who should know better, sitting just feet away. An old lady in the corner gently tugged her husband's sleeve, as if telling him not to look. Another man got up and headed to the restroom, clearly to avoid Harper's eyes. A young woman pulled out her phone, not to call for help, but to put in earbuds, as if blocking the sound was enough to make the bullying disappear. So cruel, so cold. Harper tried to take a deep breath, but barely any air came in, as if the room was shrinking, walls closing in, trapping her in a glass box full of people yet completely unreachable. A tiny sob escaped, soft enough that only she heard it, but Harper knew that moment had shattered every layer of strength she'd built over the years. Jace, smelling the collapse, let out a long, delighted whistle. "There it is. Thought you were tough, huh? We barely said anything, and you're already crying." His friends nodded, eyes glowing with twisted pleasure. One shoved his phone right into Harper's face, capturing every tear, every tremble. "Premium content right here." He laughed. "Post this and it'll get thousands of views." Hearing that made the floor disappear beneath her. They didn't just want to humiliate her in front of the people here. They wanted to preserve it, multiply it, turn her into a joke for strangers she'd never even met. Harper tried to say something, anything, but her throat closed up. No sound came out. She lifted a hand, touched a tear sliding down her cheek, tried to stop them, but the tears wouldn't stop. And that was the moment Harper truly broke. They laughed harder, the sound slamming back into her face like invisible punches. Every laugh carried the same clear message: "You're weak, you're alone, no one will ever stand with you." And the diner stayed silent. The silence stretched so long that Harper could hear the creak of her own wheelchair wheels, hear her heartbeat pounding in her chest, hear the uncontrollable shaking. She stopped trying to stay calm, stopped pretending to be strong, stopped forcing a polite smile like every other time. Harper dropped her head, shoulders shaking with each sob, letting the tears fall freely. A few people glanced over, then looked away. A few others sighed inwardly, but still did nothing. That indifference was the final curtain on the cruel play the Drayton crew had staged. Harper had felt alone before, but never like this. Just as Harper hung her head, shoulders shaking with each sob and tears falling uncontrollably, a sudden sound buzzed from under the table, small but sharp like a needle piercing the thick air of the canyon grill. Harper flinched. It was her phone. Harper reached for it, fingers trembling like over-tightened guitar strings, and saw nothing but an unknown number, no name, no contact, nothing familiar. Her heart skipped a beat. At this moment, when every eye avoided her, when the whole town seemed to have turned its back, a call from a strange number could only mean something worse, or something completely different. Her breath caught in her throat, but Harper swallowed hard and put the phone to her ear. Her voice was so thin it was barely a whisper. On the other end, there was no background noise, no traffic, no hesitation, just a deep, slightly raspy male voice, the kind that had roared over miles of wind and dust. "Hold strong, kid. Family's on the way." Harper froze. Her mind went blank for a long second that felt like an entire afternoon. Family? She had no parents left, no siblings, no relatives in Flagstaff. No one. Wrong number. Harper breathed out, half broken. But the voice didn't respond with confusion or an apology like a wrong number call normally would. Instead came a slow, rock-solid statement, like a promise forged in steel. No mistake. Life didn't throw you into this alone. We're coming. Before Harper could ask, "Who are you?" the line went dead. A dry click rang in her ear, then the screen went dark, reflecting her face, tear-streaked, confused, and suddenly holding not just fear, but hope. Harper lowered the phone. Her hands were still shaking, but it wasn't the shaking of terror anymore. It was something she couldn't name, an invisible shift in the air around her. A change. She looked around. The canyon grill was exactly the same. The Drayton crew still sneering. Customers still looking down. Marcy biting her lip, trying not to see. No one else had heard the call. No one else knew that in one brief moment, a tiny crack had just appeared in Harper's dark world, and light was leaking through. Harper pressed her hand to her chest, trying to replay that voice. Deep, solid. Not the voice of a mocker. Not the voice of a scary stranger. The voice of someone who believed she deserved protecting. Even if she didn't know who they were, she had no family. But that call said otherwise. Family's on the way. Harper shook her head, wondering if she was hallucinating in the middle of a breakdown. But the words kept repeating in her mind like drumbeats. Family. On the way. What family? Who? Why call her kid? How did they know she was in trouble? And where were they coming from? Harper set the phone on her lap, eyes still wide, heart pounding to a rhythm different from fear now. A stronger rhythm. What she didn't know, what no one in the canyon grill knew, was that the call had just thrown a match into the sun-drenched Arizona sky. A tiny spark, but enough to ignite a storm that had been quietly building from miles away. A storm of steel, leather, and Harley-Davidson thunder. A storm that, when it hit Flagstaff, would change everything forever. For Harper, for the Drayton crew, and for this silent town. In that moment, with the shame still wet on her lashes, Harper felt something for the first time all morning. She was not entirely alone. Harper was still staring at the black phone screen when a very faint, very distant sound, but strong enough to stir the dead air inside the canyon grill, began to creep in. At first, no one noticed. It was just a low rumble somewhere down the street, blending with the sparse morning traffic of Flagstaff. But then it grew louder, deeper, more steady, like the heartbeat of a giant beast waking up at the end of Route 66. An old lady by the window frowned and tilted her head, listening. A man stirring his coffee suddenly stopped. Even Marcy, who was trying to avoid all attention from the Drayton crew, glanced quickly at the glass, her brow creasing. Something wasn't normal. Harper heard it too. But with her mind tangled from the mysterious call, it took her a few seconds to realize the sound wasn't a regular truck or motorcycle. It was thicker, louder, almost synchronized, a chain of deep, solid, powerful beats drawing closer. Jace was the first of the Drayton crew to react. He looked up, frowned, eyes narrowing, as if he sensed something. "What's that noise?" one of his guys asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the unease in his voice. Another forced a laugh. "Probably just some old guys with loud pipes. No big deal." But his voice lacked its usual cocky volume. The engine roar grew until the windows started to vibrate faintly, like Flagstaff's first shiver before a storm. The old lady by the window set her coffee down, her hand trembling slightly as the sound got closer. The man at the register looked up curiously. A little girl sitting with her mom in the corner stared wide-eyed out the window, mouth open like she was seeing something huge. Harper tilted her head, tears not fully dry but eyes wide with surprise. She didn't dare hope for anything, yet her heart pounded in time with the mechanical thunder rolling closer like ground-shaking thunder. Jace jumped up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. The instant he looked out, the smug grin from earlier vanished. His face froze, then shifted into a small panic he tried, and failed to hide. "What the?" he whispered. One of the others rushed to his side and pressed his face to the glass. "Holy!" He didn't finish the sentence because the engines roared louder, thicker, making the spoons in the cups rattle. Harper turned, and for the first time saw what was turning the thugs pale. The first 3 Harley-Davidsons had just turned onto the street. Only 3. But those 3 were enough to flip the energy in the diner upside down. Massive chrome-covered machines gleaming under the Arizona sun, their thunderous engines sounding like a warning growl. The 3 riders were nothing like anyone Harper had ever seen. All 3 wore black leather cuts with the unmistakable red and white patch on the chest. "Hell's Angels," a customer in the corner whispered. "No way." And as if answering that whisper, behind the first 3 Harleys, an endless line began to appear. 10, then 20, then 30. Each Harley rolled in like a steel warrior, chrome flashing in the sun, engines roaring down the whole street. A thin cloud of dust rose from the hot asphalt. The wind from the first bikes blasted against the diner windows, making the thugs instinctively step back half a pace. No way this is about us," one of them muttered, voice shaking. Jace tried to force a smirk, but it came out cold. "Relax, they're just passing through." But the moment he finished speaking, the lead Harley turned sharply and pulled straight into the Canyon Grill parking lot, tires crunching loudly on the gravel. Then the second, then the third, then all of them. One by one, the Harleys filed in, lining up until the lot was nearly full. 40, 50, and more kept coming. Everyone inside stood up, pressing against tables to see outside. Harper leaned forward too, eyes so wide she felt like she couldn't blink. A sea of black leather, red-winged death-head patches, and a wall of thunderous engines rolling in like an army. The Drayton crew officially lost every ounce of confidence. The biggest guy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Another turned to Jace. "Dude, this can't be because of the wheelchair girl, right?" Jace didn't answer. He just stared outside, hands quietly clenching into fists to hide the trembling. Harper watched the scene and felt goosebumps, not from fear, but because she understood something deeper was happening. The steel storm the mysterious call had warned about. It was real, and the shield this whole town had built out of cowardly silence was about to be torn apart. Harper didn't yet understand why they were here, didn't know who had called, didn't know why that voice called her kid and said family's coming. But looking out, watching dozens then hundreds of bikers dismounting, sunlight glinting off helmets and leather, Harper felt with absolute certainty that those words were no empty promise. Her family was really coming. The moment the first Harleys entered the lot, the ground trembled lightly like drums announcing a parade, but that was only the beginning. From the far end of Route 66, more bikes kept pouring in, not in small groups, but in waves of 10, like endless steel tides. The combined roar mixed into a primal, deep, thick sound that made the Canyon Grill's windows vibrate with every beat. Harper stared out the window, eyes huge, unsure whether to be afraid or to believe in the fire rising inside her. She had heard the engines, she had seen the first 3 Harleys, but what was in front of her now went beyond anything she could have imagined. A waterfall of steel flooding into Flagstaff. The 30th bike, the 40th, the 50th, the 60th, each one polished to a mirror shined by desert sun, every rider wearing the black leather cut with the blazing red Hell's Angels patch on the back, white wings, grinning skull, bold lettering curved around it. Pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped dead, mouths open. A middle-aged man pulled out his phone to record and called someone. "You won't believe this. Hell's Angels, hundreds pouring into Canyon Grill." People came running from every direction. the way crowds gather before a storm, except this time no one was hiding. Everyone wanted to witness it. The whole street funneled toward the parking lot, like it was being pulled by a giant magnet. Harper saw the mix of shock, fear, and excitement in their eyes. From inside the diner, it looked like a live biker war movie playing right outside the glass. The Harleys kept flooding in, turning neatly, tires spinning with razor-sharp precision like they'd practiced the maneuver 1,000 times. When the 70th, 80th, 90th appeared, a chill ran down the Drayton crew's spines. The same crew that thought they were the toughest kids in town now reduced to shrinking shadows by the window. No way, the biggest one stammered, eyes bulging. He backed up, tripped over a chair, and sent it crashing to the floor so loudly the whole diner turned. Jace Drayton stood by the window, face drained of color like all the blood had been sucked out. He swallowed hard, trying to act calm, but his knuckles were white from gripping too tight. "They're just passing through," he choked out, every word sounding like it had to be dragged over broken glass. But right then, the 100th Harley rolled in. The biggest one, the deepest growl, chrome exhaust pipes blazing like steel torches. It signaled, and the entire convoy stopped as one, perfect, badass, precise, like a punch thrown into the air. Gravel flew under the tires. The ground shook beneath everyone's feet. A strange, almost sacred silence fell for a few seconds as the engines began shutting off one by one. But the quiet didn't ease the tension. No, it made Flagstaff hear its own heartbeat. Every shutdown felt like a steel hammer striking the Drayton crew's chests. Inside the Canyon Grill, no one dared breathe loud. No one moved. No one wanted to be the one to break the moment stretched tight like a wire about to snap. Then the footsteps began. One by one, heavy, solid, in unison. Harper looked through the glass and saw 100 bikers dismounting at once. A sea of black leather, studded boots, black gloves, scratched helmets, and tattoos covering rock-hard arms. Hundreds of boots hitting the ground in rhythm like a steel army assembling. People outside started live streaming, whispering excitedly while filming. My God, an entire big chapter showed up. Never seen 100 Harleys in Flagstaff in my life. They're heading straight for Canyon Grill. A 10-year-old boy tugged his mom's hand, eyes shining. "Mom, look, real Hell's Angels." His mother pulled him close but couldn't tear her own eyes away. Harper almost forgot to breathe. Her hands rested on her wheelchair wheels, palms sweaty but no longer shaking. Instead, a strange electricity ran through every vein in her body, the same strangeness as the voice on the phone. Families on the way. A tall biker with silver-braided beard stepped off the last Harley. He removed his helmet. Steel gray eyes swept the entire parking lot. Even from a distance, Harper felt the power in that gaze. He didn't need to shout or posture. His presence alone made the space around him shrink. The other bikers grouped up, arms crossed, silent. No one rushed, no one joked. They all waited for the signal from the silver-bearded man. "Jesus," Marcy whispered behind Harper, hand over her mouth. What's about to happen?" No one answered, because everyone already knew the answer was scarier than any words. Inside the Canyon Grill, the Drayton crew tried to back up, but only bumped into tables and chairs. All 5 of them now looked like kids caught red-handed, every trace of toughness gone. One stammered, voice shaking. Can't be here for the wheelchair girl, right?" Jace whipped around and hissed, "Shut up," but the command had no strength, and even he didn't believe it. He looked at Harper, not with contempt anymore, but with real fear, like he just realized he was standing on the wrong side of a war he could never win. Harper saw it, and for the first time on this morning full of humiliation, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel alone, because the parking lot outside was now packed wall to wall with people. The town only dared whisper about Hell's Angels, 100 of them, 100 engines, 100 pairs of eyes behind dark glasses reflecting the same thing. Their target wasn't Flagstaff. It wasn't the Canyon Grill. It was one thing only: Harper Lewis. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. Everyone felt it coiling in the air, a truth as hard as steel. The Drayton crew had just picked the wrong fight. The Canyon Grill door swung open at the exact moment the 100 engines outside fell into total silence, and that soft ding of the bell became the sound that made everyone inside jump like someone had just crushed the air itself. The room was already stretched like a bowstring, but when the first figure stepped over the threshold, that tension exploded into a silence, so heavy you could hear the racing hearts of the ones who had caused Harper's morning of shame. The man who entered first was Reverend Colt, nearly 6'3", built strong but not bulky, silver beard braided into 2 long plaits hanging down his chest, face chiseled like it was carved from rock, and steel gray eyes, the kind that had seen more pain than this entire town combined. But in those eyes wasn't cruelty, it was something deeper. Life experience, empathy, the wariness of a man who had lived long enough in a harsh world to know what it feels like to be abandoned. Every bootstep he took on the tile rang solid, not loud but enough to make the floor seem to shake with him. Right behind him, 50 bikers filed in down the aisle, the other 50 forming ranks at the door. No pushing, no noise, no chaos, all moving with perfect coordination that needed no command. Their presence changed the air completely. No more laughter from the Drayton crew, no more stifled trembling breaths, no more averted eyes, only absolute silence, the kind people keep when they know they're standing before something far bigger than themselves. Harper felt that energy reach her before Reverend Colt even got close. He didn't scan the room. He didn't ask questions. He didn't throw threatening looks at the thugs. He just walked, straight to Harper. Every step cut through the cowardice-filled air the diner's customers had created by turning their backs on a girl being humiliated. Harper saw his leather boots stop in front of her wheelchair, sunlight from outside making the Hell's Angels patch on his vest glow blood red. He took off his sunglasses, hooked them on his collar, revealing those deep gray eyes. And it was those eyes, not the engines or the parade outside, that made time stop for Harper. Reverend Colt's gaze met hers not with pity, not with curiosity, not with judgment, with recognition, with truly seeing her, as if he had known her story long before this morning. And when he dipped his head slightly, his hard face softening, Harper felt exactly what the mystery call had whispered. Family was here. Reverend Colt spoke in a low, gentle voice, loud enough only for her even though he didn't raise it at all. "You okay, kid?" Harper opened her mouth, but her throat locked. No sound came out. But Reverend Colt didn't need an answer. One look at her red eyes and trembling hands was enough. He stood up straight, not turning to the Drayton crew yet, but spoke to a biker behind him. "Lock the door." Just 2 words. No yelling, no growling, no show of violence. But a biker stepped forward, turned the key in the lock, and slid the bolt, sealing the canyon grill off from the outside world like a private courtroom. During that moment, the Drayton crew froze solid. The biggest one didn't even dare breathe loud. Another instinctively lowered his phone and hid it in his pocket, face going from red to paper white, as he realized 100 Hell's Angels felt nothing like anything they'd ever faced. Jace Drayton, the guy who always bragged and thought he ruled Flagstaff, suddenly looked exactly like a little kid caught stealing cookies. Tiny beads of sweat rolled down his temple, even though the diner wasn't hot. Harper felt that fear radiate off the thugs, chilling the air like cold wind. Reverend Colt finally turned, slowly, as if giving them time to realize their mistake. When he looked straight at them, no one could hold his gaze. It was the look of a man who had spent his life facing the most dangerous men, ruthless ones, liars, traitors, and now saw 5 spoiled brats pretending to be tough. It was the look that made the thugs understand instantly that the game had changed. Reverend Colt took 1 step forward, then another. The wall of bikers behind him moved with him, forming a solid black leather barrier across the diner entrance. No one spoke, no one needed to. That silence sucked the breath right out of the Drayton crew's lungs. Jace tried to force a grin, but it twisted and died the second it started. We were just joking around," he stammered, his 18-year-old voice suddenly sounding exactly like a scared 8-year-old's. Reverend Colt didn't move. "That," he said quietly, "is what you think." Then he tilted his head toward Harper, still trembling. But that is not what she felt. Inside the canyon grill, no one dared breathe loudly. Marcy covered her mouth, eyes welling with late regret. The old couple in the corner hung their heads lower, wrestling with their own cowardice. The owner stood frozen, knowing this morning would live in his memory forever. Reverend Colt turned fully, placed a hand on the chair back in front of Harper, and bent down to her eye level. His voice dropped so low only Harper and the nearest bikers could hear, "You never deserved this. Not here, not anywhere." Harper didn't know how she was breathing or what rhythm her heart was beating to. The only thing she felt was warmth rising from deep in her chest, not because someone had saved her, but because for the first time in a morning that had felt like a lifetime, she was standing on the right side of something bigger than herself. And when Reverend stood tall again, turning to face the Drayton crew, His broad shoulders blocked every cruel stare Harper had endured for the past hour. The thugs were no longer cocky, no longer laughing, no longer pretending to be tough. They were frozen like statues. Reverend Colt straightened up, his hands slowly leaving the back of the chair in front of Harper, and the entire canyon grill felt stretched so tight that one loud breath could shatter everything. He turned, took one step toward Jace Drayton and his crew, a step that was neither rushed nor threatening, yet made all five of them back up like the floor had just cracked open beneath them. Reverend didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to roar. He didn't need to flex. Just with the weight of his silence, he made the whole room shrink, and the Drayton crew looked like scared little kids caught red-handed. He tilted his head, voice low but ringing deep like a bronze bell. You think you're tougher when you humiliate a girl in a wheelchair? The question dropped into the diner like an invisible axe blow. No one breathed hard. No one dared swallow. Even the sound of spoons stirring coffee disappeared, as if the noise itself felt ashamed to interrupt this moment. Jace opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around for help, only to meet eyes that now showed nothing but disgust and a mirror of the weakness he'd spent years hiding. Reverend didn't stop. He took another step. His leather boots hit the floor with a dull thud that made one of the crew flinch and step back again. Let me get this straight, Reverend said, voice even neither loud nor soft but sharp as a scalpel. 5 big, tall, able-bodied young men, picking on a kid who was just trying to have a quiet breakfast. He looked at each one, eyes cold, not the cold of cruelty, but the cold of contempt for those who'd lost their dignity. You call that tough, or is that all the manhood you've got? One of them swallowed and tried. We were just messing around. Reverend raised an eyebrow, his stare cutting so deep the whole group seemed to shrink. Messing around? He repeated the words slowly, heavily, grinding them like gravel. Messing around is when everyone laughs. Messing around is when the other person feels safe. Messing around doesn't leave someone crying so hard they can't breathe. He pointed toward Harper, without touching her, just a gesture, and for a split second his eyes softened. Then they turned back to the thugs. Steel once more. That wasn't messing around, Reverend said. That was bullying. That was assault. That was cowardice. The word cowardice hit the room like a death sentence for whatever was left of the Drayton crew's pride. A biker behind Reverend, one with full-sleeve tattoos, leaned forward, eyes ready to tear someone apart. But Reverend raised a hand, barely looking, and said not needed. The simple gesture made the entire line of bikers ease back half a step and stand still. That absolute respect for Reverend told the whole diner. He didn't need violence. He was the strength. And right now, he was the law. Reverend looked straight at Jace, who stood frozen like every ounce of swagger had been ripped out of him. You know what bothers me, Jace, he said, using the name with chilling accuracy. It's not even that you bullied someone. I've lived long enough to know bullying is what weak people do. Jace sucked in air, like he'd been punched in the chest. Reverend went on. What really disgusts me is that you did it to someone who's been fighting to survive since she was 4 years old. Just that one sentence, and something inside Harper's chest cracked open. Not with fear, not with shame, but with recognition. Reverend didn't stop. He lowered his voice, but it rolled through the diner, like distant thunder. You're not men. You're not tough. You're nothing but spoiled kids who've been told for too long that you run this town. One of them tried. We didn't. Reverend lifted one finger, just one, and the kid shut up instantly. Quiet, Reverend said. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice the air. You've had the whole morning to talk. Now it's my turn. A few customers hung their heads so low they couldn't look at Harper anymore. An older man even wiped tears away, ashamed of his own silence. But Reverend wasn't looking at them yet. He kept every ounce of his stare on the Drayton crew, holding them in place with nothing but will. You know what I really don't get? Reverend asked, voice terrifyingly calm. How you looked at this girl. He turned back to Harper, eyes softening like sky after a storm. Someone who's already lost so much. Someone still trying to be strong. Someone who never hurt a soul. Then he spun back to the thugs, voice hardening again. And you decided she was the perfect target to dump your own weakness on. Jace tried to back up more, but his back hit the wall. His face was ghost white. Reverend took one more step, slow, but enough to freeze every vein in the Drayton crew's bodies. Let me tell you the secret of real strength, Reverend said, eyes drilling into each of them. Real strength doesn't need to make someone else feel small to feel big. He pointed at Harper. Real strength is the person who stands in the storm and protects the weaker ones. A woman in the corner started crying, hand over her mouth, because those words hit the bottom of her conscience. Everyone else looked down, ashamed, realizing the strongest person in the room all along had been the trembling girl in the wheelchair, not the 5 big guys. Reverend didn't let up. He walked right up to Jace, close enough that the kid's face was only a few feet away. "You know who I call weak?" Reverend asked. "Not the girl in the wheelchair, not the kid who lost her parents and kept living, not the one an entire diner turned their backs on while she still tried to hold her head up." He paused, then drove each word home like hammer blows. Weak is 5 guys ganging up on someone who can't even stand up. A biker behind Reverend let out a low rumbling. Like supporting thunder. Jace's shoulders jerked with trembling. His lips moved but no sound came out. Harper, still shaking, felt her chest swell with something new, the feeling of being protected, seen, standing on the side of justice. Reverend stepped back half a pace, eyes never leaving the thugs. "Now listen close," he said, voice dropping low. "That parking lot out there holds 100 Harleys." Jace swallowed. "Every single one," Reverend continued, "represents a person who's been through things you can't even imagine. They've lost friends, lost brothers, lost pieces of themselves on dark roads." He pointed out the window toward the bikes. "Those people never, let me say it again, never let a kid like her take that kind of shame without someone standing up." Another biker took one step forward, boot studs clomping on the floor, eyes boring through the Drayton crew like he was asking, "You getting it yet?" Reverend took a slow breath, standing in the middle of the room like a man who had nothing left to prove. "You humiliated her in front of this whole town," he said, "but you forgot one thing." He glanced at Harper, eyes softening again, then back to the thugs. "Not everyone in this town is as weak as you thought." Then he stepped aside, letting the combined stare of every biker in the diner, over 70 inside, dozens more blocking the doors, fall straight on the Drayton crew, all silent, all judging. "Now then," Reverend said, voice soft as the calm before the storm, "anything you boys want to say?" But none of them opened their mouths, because they finally understood the girl they'd mocked all morning was no longer alone. Standing in front of them was a family of steel, and a storm of justice they had accidentally summoned themselves. And the entire diner for the first time all morning had to face their own cowardice. In the thick silence that felt like a church before judgment, Reverend Colt turned back, walked to Harper with a gentleness that completely contradicted the steel he had just laid on the Drayton crew. He placed a heavy but warm hand on her shoulder, a touch that felt like an apology for the whole town, and a reminder that she was no longer alone. Harper looked up, eyes still streaked with tears, but no longer filled with despair. Reverend bent down and spoke low enough that only Harper could hear, yet clear enough that the whole world inside the canyon grill stopped to listen to every vibration in those words. "Tell them how it felt." Harper froze. The words blew like wind through the ashes inside her chest. The pain, the humiliation, the town's silence, the suffocating loneliness, all of it spun in her mind, crashed together, then pushed her forward like this was the last chance she would ever get to say what she had never dared say in 16 years. The room was dead silent. No one moved. The Drayton crew stood huddled, faces pale. The other customers kept their heads down in shame, unable to look at the girl they had abandoned. Harper wiped the corner of her eye with a trembling hand, took a breath so deep it hurt her lungs. Then she lifted her chin, a small motion, but in that moment, stronger than the roar of 100 Harleys outside, she turned straight toward the Drayton crew. For the first time all morning, she didn't look away. Her voice came out shaky at first, like pine needles in the wind, but every word shot like an arrow. "I didn't choose to be disabled." Jace flinched as if slapped. Harper went on, voice growing stronger, "But you chose to be cruel." The words hit the floor like a weight on marble. A customer near the counter let his spoon clatter onto the saucer, the metal on ceramic sound deafening in the silence. A young woman in the corner let out a small sob, hand over her mouth, ashamed of her own silence. Reverend stood behind Harper, saying nothing, but his gaze on her back was the pillar holding her steady in the most important moment of her life. Harper swallowed and kept going, each word ripped from a heart that had been wounded too long. "I just wanted to eat breakfast like a normal person. I wanted to be looked at like a human being, not like a joke." She squared her shoulders, voice rising. "But you laughed. You mocked. You filmed it. You acted like my pain was entertainment." The Drayton crew shrank together as if her words were light, exposing the rot beneath their fake toughness. Harper looked Jace dead in the eye. You might be stronger than me. You can run faster. You can stand and I can't. She paused one beat. Then she said the line that silenced the entire diner. But at least, I don't use my strength to make other people feel small. A biker behind Reverend gave a slow nod, lips pressed tight like he was saying, "Damn right," Harper continued, voice no longer shaking. Strong, clear, ringing. I lost my parents when I was 4. I don't remember my mom's face. I don't know what my dad's voice sounded like. She placed a hand on her wheelchair. I had to learn how to live again from zero. I didn't get a choice. I didn't choose to be like this. She pointed straight at the Drayton crew. But you chose to become the kind of people you are. A silence stretched even heavier than before the storm. No one laughed. No one cleared their throat. No one moved. Harper kept going. Like a door locked inside her heart for years had just blown open. I'm used to pitying looks. But today you turned me into a joke in front of the whole town. She shook her head. Fresh tears fell. But this time they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of truth. The worst part wasn't your laughter. Harper looked around the room, red eyes steady. It was that everyone stayed silent. Many heads dropped lower, trying to escape their own reflection in Harper's eyes. Marcy let out a sob and covered her mouth. An old man shakily took off his baseball cap and set it on the table like a silent apology. Harper took one more deep breath and finished. But I'm not silent anymore. I won't let anyone decide my worth ever again. She turned to Jace, who stood crumpled and delivered the final line like a nail, driven into the Canyon Grill's wooden floor. I didn't choose disability, but today I choose to stand up, even if it's on wheels, to let you know I'm not afraid anymore. Reverend placed his hand on her shoulder again, but this time not to support. It was to honor the strength that had just burst out of that small body. He nodded slowly, proudly, then turned back to the Drayton crew with a look that said, "See that? That's strength." Another biker let out a quiet but ringing, "Atta girl." The whole room seemed to breathe again, after minutes of being frozen. But the breath wasn't relief. It was the breath of people who had just seen the truth. They tried to avoid, dragged into the light. Harper sat straighter in her wheelchair, no longer shrinking like when the thugs mocked her, no longer hiding her face, no longer curling into herself under others' stares. She had found her voice. The room still vibrated with the truth. Harper had just laid bare when Marcy, the waitress who had stood frozen all morning, suddenly stepped out from behind the counter, gripping her apron like she was gathering every last ounce of courage she had left. She took a huge breath, walked toward Reverend and Harper, then turned to face the entire diner. Her voice shook, but it was no longer weak. I saw everything," Marcy said, hand on her chest like she was keeping her heart from leaping out. "I was standing right there. I heard every laugh. I saw him." She pointed at Jace and his crew, pretend to limp to mock her. She looked at Harper, eyes red with regret. "And I did nothing." A small sob came from the corner. A woman around 60 stood up, hand over her mouth, staring at Harper like the girl was a mirror of her own cowardice. "I'm sorry," the woman said, voice breaking. "I was sitting right there. I saw you crying. I wanted to step in, but I was scared." She bowed her head. "I'm ashamed that you were braver than me." An older man stood next, taking off his baseball cap and holding it over his heart. "The kid's right," he said, voice low but honest. "We stayed quiet. We let it happen." He looked at Harper, then at Reverend. "This won't happen again." The apologies spread through the diner like a wind after the storm, gentle but painful, as if everyone was finally admitting the guilt they had buried for too long. Some placed a hand on Harper's shoulder as they passed. Some whispered sorry. Some could only nod, but their eyes no longer looked away, only shame and a promise to never repeat it. Reverend stood still, letting them speak, letting them own it. He didn't preach. He didn't force confessions, but his silence was the reminder. Today, everyone faces themselves. The Drayton crew shrank into the corner like kids whose masks of power had just been ripped off. Jace no longer pretended to be cool, no longer smirked, no longer put on the rich untouchable act. He watched the townspeople apologize to Harper with wide, blinking eyes, like he couldn't believe the silence he had always counted on had vanished like dust under Harley tires. Reverend turned to Marcy and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said, simple words that made Marcy cry because she felt forgiven. Then he looked at the owner, who had stood like a statue since it all began. "Now it's time you do your part." The owner, Ray Donovan, the man everyone knew feared the Drayton family more than anything, swallowed dryly and wiped sweat from his brow. For a moment he couldn't meet Harper's eyes, but then, like he finally surrendered to a conscience that had been crushed too long, he stepped forward and said, voice shaking, "You boys get out of my diner, right now." The whole place went dead silent. No one had ever dared kick the Drayton crew out of anywhere in Flagstaff. Jace's eyes went wide. You can't." "I just did," Ray said, and for the first time his voice didn't shake. "And you will never set foot in here again." A biker near the door cracked a half smile like he was thinking, finally someone grew a spine. As the Drayton crew walked out, each step felt like stones tied to their feet. No one clapped them on the back. No one feared them. No one laughed with them. No one shielded them with silence anymore. They walked down the aisle between two walls of bikers, cold, silent eyes tracking them like living steel pillars, making their knees want to buckle. Jace tried one last grab at pride. We'll talk to my dad. Reverend cut him off without even turning around. "Your dad can't save you from what you did." A long-haired biker by the door smirked. "Not even the law can save you now." And they were more right than the kids knew. Because the second the Drayton crew touched the door, Marcy called out, "I'll testify." 4 other customers at once. "So will I." A young man held up his phone. "I got video of them fake limping to mock her." Jace froze solid. The biggest one whispered in pure despair, "We're done." Reverend looked at Harper, then at the boys with a stare that stripped them bare. "The consequences for you boys start the minute this door opens." And when the Drayton crew stepped out of the Canyon Grill, the Flagstaff sunlight hitting their faces no longer felt warm. It felt like the light of justice staring straight at their mistakes. Behind them, inside the diner, the townspeople kept coming to Harper, not because they were forced, but because they truly felt regret. Harper looked at each face, the ones who had once looked down in fear now bowing their heads in remorse, and inside her the old pain was still there, but it was no longer alone. For the first time in years, Harper felt like the world hadn't completely turned its back on her. For the first time, she felt protected. On the right side, the air inside the Canyon Grill shifted again after the Drayton crew was shoved out the door. Gone was the crushing tension, the averted eyes, the hearts pounding with fear. In its place came a strange warmth, like the breath of people who had finally faced their own conscience and stepped out of the darkness. Harper sat quietly in her wheelchair, feeling as though a storm had just torn through her life, but instead of leaving ruins, it had left her something she never knew she was allowed to touch: belonging. Reverend Colt placed his hand on Harper's shoulder again, but this time it wasn't to remind or to steady. It was the touch of a father resting his hand on a child he was proud of. He tilted his head. "You did good, little sister." That word, little sister, fell like an invisible cord tying Harper to something bigger than herself. A family. Not the one she had lost, not the one she used to dream of, but a family of people who hadn't known her an hour ago yet, had stood in front of her pain like they'd been guarding her all her life. When Reverend stepped back, one biker came forward, nearly 6'6", arms covered in ink from wrist to shoulder, full beard but eyes soft as morning light. He laid a hand on Harper's shoulder and gave a small nod. "You're 3 times tougher than we were at your age." Then another biker came. Then another. They approached without hurry, without pushing, like it was a ritual. The second one placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the Steele family, little sister." The third rested his hand on the back of her chair. "We don't let anyone hurt you again." The fourth, "You stand up your way. We've got your back our way." An older biker with silver hair drifting under a red bandana knelt down to Harper's eye level. He spoke softly. "I lost my daughter in a wreck. Watching you today, I wish she'd had even half the strength you just showed." Harper brought a hand to her mouth, choking back a sound. Not pain, not shame, but a warm feeling that hurt the heart in a beautiful way. Then a younger biker, bright blue eyes, gentler looking than most, stepped up holding something small that caught the light. He smiled, a little shy under the attention of the older riders. "You sister deserve this more than anyone I've ever met." He held it out, a silver angel pin, tiny wings wrapped around a circle. Harper stared like it belonged to another world. The symbol the old-timers wore on their cuts, their bikes, their chains, a mark for those considered real family in the Steele family. Harper opened her mouth, but no words came. The young biker grinned. "It rides with you now." He bent down and pinned the angel to the armrest of her wheelchair, twisting it gently to lock it in place. So anyone who sees it knows you've got 100 people behind you. When he stood, every biker behind him nodded as one. Official recognition. Harper looked at the pin, then at the 100 people standing around her in the morning light, pouring through the windows. Tears fell again, but this time there was no pain dragging them down, no shame flooding in, no darkness closing over her chest. These were different tears, tears she had never been allowed to cry, tears of being held up, of being seen, of belonging. A biker with a voice deep as the ground under Harley tires chuckled softly. Now those are real tears. The group laughed lightly, warm, genuine, no mockery, no judgment. A sound that made Harper feel no longer cut off from the world. One by one the bikers came. Some placed a hand on her shoulder, some on the chair back, some brushed the angel pin like a blessing. Every touch carried weight. Not the weight of muscle, but the weight of unconditional protection. Harper heard someone whisper behind her, "One day this kid's gonna tell today like a war story." Reverend Colt smiled. "No, today already is the war story." Harper laughed through her tears. A soft sound like wind through winter pines, but it rang so deep every biker went quiet just to hear it. Reverend bent down one last time and straightened the angel pin. "You don't walk alone anymore," he said. Harper placed her hand over the pin, then over Reverend's rough hand resting on her chair. "I know," she whispered. "For the first time, I really know." And on that morning that had once been full of shame, Harper Lewis, the child who had lived her whole life in silence and pity, was lifted up by a family she never thought she would find. A family of steel, a family of rough people with unbreakable hearts, a family where she was no longer the disabled girl from Flagstaff. She was the little sister of the Hells Angels. And nothing on earth is stronger than that. 1 month after that fateful morning, Flagstaff was no longer the same Flagstaff. Not because of the thunder of Harleys that once shook the town, nor because the story had spread across Arizona like wildfire, but because the people here started looking at each other differently. And they looked at Harper Lewis with completely new eyes. The Canyon Grill, once a stage for cruelty and silence, now had a new sign in the window, big enough that no one could miss it. Zero tolerance for bullying. No exceptions. The bold red letters on white weren't just a sign, they were the town's confession, the mark of the day they let a child be hurt in front of them, and did nothing. Every time Harper rolled past that sign, her heart warmed like a reminder that the truth she spoke that day hadn't vanished into thin air. It stayed carved into the brick wall of the very place she once suffered. Harper no longer shrank into herself when she entered class at Flagstaff High. She no longer avoided people's eyes. Instead, she met them, straight on, the same way she had looked at the Drayton crew that day. She even had new friends. Naomi, the curly-haired girl from English class, who used to watch Harper from a distance, now pushed her down the halls every day. Mason, the graffiti-loving guy, gave Harper a small painting of the silver angel pin with glowing wings, proudly taped inside her locker door. Harper had also started after-school art class. She had always loved drawing but never signed up, afraid people would see her as the wheelchair girl trying too hard. But now, Harper no longer let those thoughts control her. She still remembered what Reverend Colt said before leaving Flagstaff. "Live like you deserve the world because you do." And Harper believed it. For the first time in her life, she really believed it. In art class, she painted the Canyon Grill in sunlight, then a line of Harleys stretching to the horizon, then another Reverend Colt standing in a cloud of red Arizona dust, looking forward like a guardian. Her art teacher looked at the paintings and said only, "You paint with your heart." Harper just smiled, because now that heart was no longer choked by fear or shame. As for the Drayton crew, the change for them was not gentle like it was for Harper. The Hells Angels never came back for them. They didn't need to. Flagstaff handled it itself. Jace Drayton and his crew became living symbols of what the town no longer wanted to be. People didn't greet them at the grocery store. No one wanted to sit with them in the cafeteria. The rich kid parties that used to be their playground grew quiet, because no one wanted to be linked to the kids who humiliated the wheelchair girl and brought the Hells Angels to town. Jace's father, the famous contractor, took a serious hit to his reputation. Though he never said it out loud, everyone knew he was so furious, he kicked Jace out of the house for a week. But what changed the thugs the most wasn't the cold shoulder. It was the look Harper gave them. Not a look of hate, not revenge, just a look that understood they had chosen wrong, and now they had to live with it. One day in the hallway with Naomi, Jace quietly stepped aside to let Harper pass. She looked at him, no fear, no hate, and gave a small nod. Jace lowered his head in return, a tiny gesture, but the final nail in the coffin of the arrogance that once made him think Flagstaff was his playground. The town changed in ways Harper never expected. A group of volunteers started bystander training, teaching kids and adults how to step in when they see bullying. One corner of the canyon grill became a community wall. Photos of Harper with her angel pin, Reverend and the bikers in the parking lot, handwritten apologies from townspeople on a whiteboard by the register. Harper didn't love being the town legend, but she couldn't deny people saw her differently now, like a living reminder that sometimes the strongest person isn't the one who can stand tallest, but the one who refuses to stay down. One afternoon, as Harper rolled out of art class, she caught the silver angel pin gleaming in the sun, and for a moment she thought she heard the distant rumble of Harleys, faint in her memory, like the echo of a promise. "You'll never walk alone again." Harper smiled softly. The town had changed. She had changed. And even though the Hells Angels were gone, their footprints and their hearts were still stamped on every corner of Flagstaff, like engine thunder still echoing down the red dust roads of Arizona. Then one late August afternoon, when the Flagstaff sun slanted down and turned everything honey gold, Harper heard that familiar engine sound from far away, low, thick, making the ground tremble like a greeting from long-lost kin. She was sitting under a tree outside the canyon grill, sketching angel wings in her notebook, when the sound rolled down the street like a nostalgic bell. Passers-by looked up, an old couple smiled at each other, and Ray Donovan dropped his rag mid-wipe to run to the window. Harper set her pencil down. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear like before, but from a strange familiar warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she never had, until the day they first showed up. Then the convoy appeared at the end of Route 66 like a dream made of iron and sunlight. 10 bikes first, then 20, then 30, then 100 Harleys rolling in, engines blending into the steel symphony Flagstaff had heard once, and would never forget. A kid yelled, "Hell's Angels are back," and the whole street came alive. Harper couldn't look away. Reverend Colt led the pack, his silver-braided beard dancing in the wind, sunset light hitting his leather cut and making the Hells Angels patch blaze like red fire. When the convoy stopped in front of the canyon grill, Reverend dismounted slow and sure, as if his boots always knew exactly where home was. He walked to Harper, and even though she was far more confident now, her heart still pounded when he bent down and looked at her with those deep gray eyes. "Little sister," he said softly, "you doing all right?" Harper smiled, no tremble, no guard. "Yes," she answered. "I'm living, really living." Reverend nodded like that was the answer he'd been waiting to hear for a long time. Then he placed his hand on her shoulder, the familiar warm weight anchoring her to the world. "You remember what I told you?" Harper met his eyes, shining with brand new strength. "I remember." Reverend tilted his head, voice low like the engine still rumbling beneath the ground. "You never have to be alone again." Harper bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. But this time she didn't need to. The tears fell, not as signs of sadness, but of fullness. Reverend straightened, then turned to the convoy. The other bikers greeted Harper in their own ways, two-finger salutes, hands over hearts, nods, half-smiles tossed her way. The young biker who had given her the angel pin raised a thumb and pointed at the silver badge, still shining on her wheelchair. Harper touched it reflexively. It was still there, gleaming, a promise in metal. Reverend turned back. "Want to watch us ride out?" Harper laughed. "I think the whole town will watch." Reverend let out a deep, proud laugh that rolled like thunder. Then he pulled on his helmet, swung onto his black and chrome Harley, and turned the key. The engine roared to life like a crack of lightning in a clear sky. One biker raised a hand signal, and then like a steel wave, over 100 Harleys fired up at once. Flagstaff dust rose in the sunset, golden light clinging to chrome until the convoy looked like a herd of metal dragons waking up. The ground trembled, the windows rattled, Harper's heart thundered. Reverend looked back at Harper one last time, raised his hand in salute, not goodbye, but a reminder they were only one throttle twist away. Harper raised her small but steady hand in return. Then the convoy rolled out, slow, steady, like a river of steel leaving Flagstaff in the evening light. With every bike that passed, Harper felt another piece of her old fear roll away under the tires, leaving only strength behind. People lined both sides of the street and watched in silence. No words, just eyes full of respect. When the last Harley disappeared, Harper let out a long breath, like she was closing one chapter to open another. She placed her hand on the angel pin, gently tracing the cool metal. "Thank you," she whispered. To herself, to Reverend, to the convoy that had changed her life. Then Harper smiled. Not a guarded smile, not a forced one, but the smile of someone who knows she has a real family, even if they don't share blood, they share heart. A family of Harleys burning under the Arizona sunset, a family of steel, a family that will always come back, whenever she needs them. And with that smile, Harper Lewis knew something the world had once tried to make her doubt. She was not alone, never again. If you loved this story, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next emotional journeys. See you in more stories full of humanity and strength, where kindness always wins in the end.